past life regression, I had to train Ryan on all of the studio stuff, like the radio stuff. I think we spent a few hours, and I still remember doing that past life regression, hearing your voice in the background on the radio, like commenting as it was happening. It was pretty crazy, man. So,
yeah, we had tech problems that night too, but I'm glad that you remember that, the good parts of it.
Yeah, man. And so, unfortunately, we have to start the show off and the new year off with, I'm guessing, a terrorist attack in Louisiana. That's my guess. It just seems all too. I don't want to go jump right into conspiracy with this because we don't know all the facts, but a giant ISIS flag. It just seems, I don't know. It seems a little suspicious, but lots of things do nowadays, you know.
Yeah, I think I have always a weird perspective on anything that happens because I don't really trust or believe, certainly not the mainstream media, but the alternative media. And I don't consider what you do or what I do alternative media. I don't know what I would consider it, just independent, free conversation. But I don't trust the mainstream or the alternative media, Joe. I don't trust that the mainstream story is usually accurate, and I think that's what has bred a lot of the alternative media. So frankly, when I looked at that story today and I woke up with that story right on my news feed and I thought, oh wait, great, another event like this to start my day, another 2024 just continues into 2025. That is just how the world is. There's a lot of violence and there's things like this that happen in other countries all the time. And when it happens in America, we tend to think that it shouldn't be happening here, as if we're somehow immune to this.
Right.
Even countries that are known for their safety, like Japan, they just had a stabbing at a fast food restaurant the other day, which is super rare. But even in super safe countries like Japan, that kind of stuff still happens. So we live on planet Earth. We're humans. We live within cities, and we have a civilization. These kinds of things are going to happen, whether they're organic, inorganic, or whatever people believe that they are. But I want to say just one thing, one comment. I don't believe it had anything to do with ISIS. The original report was that the guy was in the country from somewhere else, that he had come through Eagle Pass, and that was making the Biden White House look really bad. And it made Trump comment that this is what happens when you have illegal immigration. Fair point, sure. But then within 8, 9, 10 hours of me looking at that story, I found out just before we did the show tonight that the guy is now a veteran who lived in Texas.
Odd.
I mean, I don't know how you how do you report that information so incorrectly? And it's very similar. I don't know if you recall the shooting in Wisconsin recently.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Same thing there. The police on the scene reported that there were only a few people who had died. I think it was 5. And then later, the report was that 3 people had died. So what, did they revive 2 of them? Did they perform some act of necromancy and bring them back from the dead? I understand that things can be reported wrong. But when you report 5 people died and then suddenly it's 3, when they reported that, the situation here in New Orleans, it's some illegal immigrant from another country, and then it changes to an American citizen who is, a former soldier. He's a veteran, which then benefits the current White House and makes the incoming White House look bad. There's something real suspicious. But my point is, to conclude my thought, Joe, my point is, I don't think it's ISIS. I think it's probably, well, if it is ISIS, it's the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. I think that it's probably not Muslims. It's not Iran. I think it benefits both the political parties, both in power and coming into power, for this to be perceived as, quote, Iranian or ISIS Islamic terrorism, when it's probably Israeli terrorism. And they're flying that false flag of ISIS just like they fly Nazi flags when a truck runs into the White House barrier, or just like when, quote, Muslims attack the World Trade Center and bring Qurans with them to make sure that the public knows these are Muslims who believe in the Quran. I think it's a staged thing, and I think that the people that are behind these kinds of things, it's not staged in the sense that people didn't die. Of course, people died. It's horrible. It's a real thing. It happened. It's probably organic to a large extent. But I think in terms of the narrative is staged. You already see how they turn it from an illegal immigrant to an American citizen who's a veteran. Then they blame it on ISIS. And who does that benefit? Certainly doesn't benefit Muslims. It certainly doesn't benefit, the countries that are in the scope, the crosshairs of our response to things like this. It benefits Israel. So, long story short, that's my initial assessment of it, and that's probably why I have been considered so controversial with my show over the years, as you know. Yeah. I don't buy either side of the story. I don't buy the alternative media either. They're liars, just like the mainstream media is. They have a narrative.
That's what makes it hard. Like, we don't know. We have to be. We are all under the impression now, and we understand now, there's an intelligence war that's been happening for at least 100 years or more, right? And it gets worse and worse as social media grows, as the internet grows, as technology grows, as influence grows. It becomes even more powerful, and we become more susceptible to it year after year. And even Mitch just mentioned too that there was a Tesla truck, which everybody knows, that blew up in the Vegas in Vegas in the Trump Towers with the ISIS flag, also rented from the same company. So what I'm saying is like, I'm not stating any hard opinions, facts, or anything about it. I appreciate your point of view, Ryan, about it. I'm just saying it just looks too set up, and then
too
people
convenient.
get hurt, and that's the bad part about it,
Well, I completely agree with you, and I don't want to have my thoughts or my feelings or my opinions misconstrued as if that's what I believe and that's what I'm pushing. That's what I tend to lean toward in terms of belief, but I don't have all the answers. I know that I don't trust, generally speaking, not completely, but I generally don't trust the mainstream media, and I generally don't trust the alternative media because, again, they both push narratives. We're already also hearing with the bird flu story that it came out of a biolab in Georgia. How did it come out of a biolab in Georgia? They haven't even isolated it or told us anything about the so-called virus, except it's different strains. They're not really sure what it is. Same thing with COVID. How did it come out of a biolab?
Every year.
Yeah, it's this. Yes, it's this, and it's this exactly. Whether it's terrorism or it's disease, it's the same story and the same narrative over and over and over and over again. And you said Mitch brought that up about the truck. What Mitch said there?
Yeah,
Mitch.
Mm-hmm. Mitch Lammers.
Okay, yeah, I know Mitch. So if Mitch is, I didn't read that about the ISIS flag in Vegas, but if that's the case, that's even more ridiculous. So there's a Tesla truck. Elon Musk is at the center of this controversy over immigration, and with Trump being blamed as being some billionaire who's controlling the country. And then it's in front of Trump Towers. And then there's a veteran American citizen who's blamed for what happened in New Orleans. And there were supposedly pipe bombs. The thing is, things can happen in the world and people die, but that doesn't mean that the narrative that's spun is accurate, or that the narrative is true, or that the narrative is real. Oftentimes things just happen, and then it's the perspective that is crafted by the media magicians, or the Medea, I think was the goddess Medea of illusions, that then create our perspectives on reality. And when you don't fit into those groups or those boxes, whether it's mainstream, alternative, left, right, whatever, then you're ostracized, because most people don't know how to think for themselves. They turn to sources of information, understandably so, and it's really kind of scary experience to step away from all of that and try to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, I could say that's why I've been friends for so long. I like to surround myself personally with people that can think for themselves. Like, listen, Ryan's one of the only people, and I'm not just trying to blow smoke here. I'm saying it because I'm kind of saddened by it. In a sense, one of the only people that's gotten online with me in a crowd with a whole bunch of popular YouTubers and Ubers and whoever and influencers, and still stood his ground in the face of all of them trying to ridicule him, trying to twist his words, trying to insult him, and still made very good points and still stuck with what you believed. I don't see a whole lot of people doing that, but I think, in my opinion, I have good positive hopes about 2025. And just hear me out, Ryan. You may not, and I'm curious to hear what you think, but I feel like the internet is a two-edged sword, right? The influence and stuff, the misinformation, the following of the cult kind of mentality thing that happens on the internet. It's very powerful, for sure. But at the same time, for people like us, like truth seekers and researchers and people that are willing to think for themselves, we are seeing certain people finally getting caught. I've seen streamers getting caught, P. Diddy's getting caught, and these are just the top. Other people getting caught. Other truths are coming out. Hopefully, when our new president gets in office, we'll have other truths getting out. I feel like that might be a bigger thing in 2025. Like, hopefully more truth is going to come out,
Well, Cat Williams was right about Diddy. I think Cat Williams is probably more accurate reporting things than any media, any influencer, any commentator, anywhere in the world. That man nailed it dead on. But I understand your sentiment. I guess people could probably consider this a positive way to look at the new year. 2025 is the year of the serpent. And although people tend to, in the West, see the serpent as wicked and evil, I guess for obvious reasons with the Garden of Eden, in the East, the serpent and the dragon is really a wise creature, and it's a very powerful protective symbol. But the serpent is actually a symbol of Jesus. People freak out. Oh my God, how's the serpent Jesus? Well, because Jesus resurrects. That's the story, at least. And the serpent resurrects. The serpent sheds its skin, and it comes into something new. We do this every year. Well, actually, we do this every day, every week, month, year. And we do this when we move into the new year. We shed the skin of 2024 and we come into the new year. So if anything's positive, it's just new opportunity. And that's opportunity, though, for bad things as well as it is for good things. I understand when you say about, a new administration coming into the White House, everybody always has hope. Personally, I don't have any hope. And I don't have hope not because I'm a negative person, but just because based on the historical,
based on based on the past.
What's happening is not a good thing. People can think, oh, it's the golden age of America. Everything's going to be wonderful. Wait till he gets back into office. I'm sorry to tell you that that's not going to happen. You could perceive it to happen, and that could be the reality you live in, just like the people that perceive Trump to be an absolute
savior
monster, which is also
it's like the savior monster thing. Hey, I met a girl one time, speaking of which, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I forget, I can't really say, I don't want to say who I was with, but when my ex told her that she voted for Trump, the girl started crying. She was like, I can't believe you voted for that monster. Like, she had a mental breakdown, And this is why when people be like, who did you vote for? Like, I don't talk about it. I just don't talk about it. And a lot of times I don't, just to be honest with you, I don't vote because I'm not going to put I give you my thumbs up of approval without knowing all the facts and all the truth about anything in life, anything, So I'm not going to start with that. Honestly, it's all a show to me too at the same time. But I do hope that this technology, these platforms, tend to bring out more authenticity in people, more truth in things. I don't think that the lies are going to stop, but I hope that it does. I have hope, Ryan. Maybe that's what it is.
I think I have hope too. I just might take a longer route to get to the hope, if that makes sense. I'll take a longer route to get there. Because, think about it like this. If you are someone who is in some capacity oppressed, enslaved, mentally, physically, there really isn't anything in your life that could get worse. But when you are completely free, things can always get worse. So there's going to be a proportion equal to the freedom or the liberty you have. There's going to be a proportion in opposition that is going to be oppressive, even if it's just the fear of losing the freedom that you have. So with new technologies, you have the benefit, but you also have the downside. And the more benefit you have, like let's say clean, quote, clean nuclear energy, you also have the downside of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima and other cases of nuclear meltdowns. So there's a proportion of like good and bad. That's just the Taoist nature of reality, right? The yin yang, the black and the white, which is, of course, with your study of magic. I mean, that's the masculine and feminine in all things. So I think that, first of all, that's important to understand, that there's that balance between the two. And so when I take this route to try to be hopeful, and I go around, the straight shot that a lot of other people take, my perspective on it is simply this, if I may briefly explain this.
Sure.
What is happening in America doesn't just mirror history for the sake of saying it mirrors history. And it doesn't just mirror maybe like the Roman Empire just for the sake of saying it without really explaining why. Like if we were to break down what's happening with the argument over immigration and visas right now, we'd have to first, just as an example, define what immigration is, define what a migrant is, define what a refugee is. These words have different meanings and different contexts, and they also have different meanings historically as opposed to the meanings they have today. So, for example, if you have this idea that we should bring the best and the brightest to America, that is what Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and others talked about. And some of these guys, like Alexander Hamilton, were much more left-wing for that time period, and yet what they actually wrote about immigration would be considered super conservative by today's standards. And so I bring that up as an example because within, let's say, the Republican MAGA apparatus, there's a lot of people that are hopeful, but before that administration even takes power, a lot of people are also dividing within the party over the issue of immigration. Whether or not visas are exploited or companies exploit them, left-wing, right-wing, whatever, the fact of the matter is America is built on the best of the best, and we should be producing the best, and we should be trying to bring in the best. And when people are brought in and they do not adhere to what Hamilton called the national spirit, then they should be removed. And it should be as simple as that. It's a black and white issue. Our founders, no matter what they disagreed on, agreed on a general principle of what the country was supposed to be and how we dealt with immigration and things of that nature. So my point is, Joe, I know that might sound stale and dry and boring.
No.
The point is,
it's good.
Neither one, I'm glad that you think so. Neither one of the political parties understand that. The Trump side doesn't understand it, clearly by their actions and comments, both the extreme and the moderates. The extremes say, let's deport J.D. Vance's wife because she's an Indian. Those are the true racists that the Democrats talk about. The Democrats, they are the ones that exploit those systems to poison the American spirit. And then the more moderates in both parties just don't have, I don't think, a basic knowledge of what those immigration systems are supposed to be. So I don't see anybody on either side making a case for the founding national spirit of the country. I see people making a case on their own personal biases and their assumptions and perceptions of what they think immigration is supposed to be without actually going to the founding of the country, which means, to come back around to my point, which means that the Trump administration isn't going to do anything much different than the Democrat Biden administration, in the sense that the Republicans will continue to poison the national spirit of this country, just like the Democrats have. They will continue to poison the spirit of this country because Trump is the one that gave you an emergency order for COVID that Biden extended. He's the one that gave you Operation Warp Speed that Biden extended, and then just a few weeks ago gave continued liability for another, 5 to 6 years to the vaccine manufacturers. Now, we don't have to talk about that from a health or a COVID perspective, whatever people's opinions are. It's the simple fact that if you are going to vote for somebody who is going to mandate and going to strip away rights when it is convenient, then like George Carlin said, they're not rights, they're privileges if the government can strip them away. And that means that the Republicans, just like the Democrats, they don't care about the spirit of America. We have a false perception of what that spirit is. And when someone tries to bring up the true spirit of this country and what it's supposed to be based on the founders' own writings, they are ostracized, they are cast out, they are mocked, they are censored on platforms that are supposed to be free speech, and thus we look at the Roman Empire and we learn that often it was the people and it was the military comprised of the people and the Praetorian Guard, who were the best of the military, who guarded the emperor, who were more often than not responsible either alongside the emperor or directly for the decline of the morals and the manners and the republican virtues of the empire.
Yeah.
Joe, there are multiple instances where the emperor tried to do the right thing and the people rebelled, where the Senate tried to do the right thing to restore liberty and the people rebelled. It's the people of the country in league with the corrupt leaders that are destroying the American spirit. This is why I don't have hope, because things will continue, despite the perception and the red hats, they will continue to slide into a dystopian abyss because we have abandoned our founding principles. And that's why I don't have hope in the current system. And that's why I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think that America has been lost. And I think that can only be rekindled on an individual level, which is what I try to do myself. I try to learn the origins of things so that I can hopefully better contribute to society as a citizen. So my point being in all of that is I don't have hope because I'm trying to look at it from a more, complex perspective and look at all of the details. And if I don't know something, then, I don't know something. But ultimately, all of us have to recognize that nothing is going to be fixed or changed by continuing to do the same thing over and over and over again. We're going to continue to get the same results over and over and over again. That's why nothing changes every day, every year.
That's 100% true. It's 100% true. So, I could tell, and I could tell you what happens, right? People are being led around to, we are responsible for everything, but people are being led around by their emotions and their validations. I mean, I just saw
bingo
10 people get dropped off just because you said something against Trump. You know,
there you go.
They just dropped immediately off. This is the real problem with this country. You can't have a discussion. You can't talk about context. You can't have a real adult discussion. You can't disagree with people. You can't say things they don't like. You can't have mannerisms they don't like. People need to be validated on such a level that it makes me sick nowadays. It makes me sick. Like, we are trying to individuate. That's the whole thing. If you're not individuating and thinking for yourself, then you're becoming a sheep. I'm not a polar person, but this is one of the time I really see things in a polar perspective. Okay. Like, if you can't individuate, think for yourself, have a discussion. You don't need constant validation. You can sit in front of somebody that disagrees with you and have a talk. If you can't do that, then you are a sheep. You're easily manipulated, because now all anybody has to do to get what they want from you is mess with your emotions. That's all they have to do.
That's it. No, that's it. You're right. You're right.
So
that's a great summary of what I just said, is that when emotions, how Republicans or conservatives will say that Democrats believe in, feelings over facts.
Yeah.
Well, the same goes for those same Republicans. They might not believe in feelings over facts, but they believe in faith over facts. Feelings and faith should not dominate facts. Facts should be dominant in a civil society. Laws should be dominant, not your emotional feelings that can be manipulated and change on a whim. That is really dangerous. And that is exactly why the Roman Empire fell. And that is exactly why America is on the brink of crumbling and collapsing, or has already crumbled and collapsed. The Roman Empire took a long time to fully fall apart. And the Republican, principles and liberties were lost long before that happened. That's where we are in this country, as far as I'm concerned. And but you're totally right. It's the emotion, just like with advertising, emotional appeals, appealing to people's feelings rather than, do you actually need this item? That's what controls all of it. Bernaysian propaganda and emotions. And if we're not going to be able to break out of that cycle, nothing is ever going to change.
Well, I'm hoping in 2025 we figure that out. Like, your feelings are like your truth about things. I'm all for love and expressing your emotions. It's one side of the four elements, right? I'm all for it. But your feelings don't mean it's the whole truth. Just like if Ryan called me an asshole and my feelings are hurt, and if it's out of context, he may have meant it in a different way. My truth is that if Ryan did call me an asshole, he's my friend, it would hurt. But that doesn't mean that's the truth of the contextual situation on what's going on around us, right? And that's what you got to be able to see from a bird's eye point of view. As soon as, I mean, we are trained now, dude, to an extent like I've never seen. As soon as we don't feel good, we're out. We are out.
Yep. Yeah.
That's scary, bro.
Yeah.
You know?
It is very scary.
Yeah, it's scary, but what do you like the drone thing, right? That blew up fast. That was one of the fastest, like, blow ups of information. Like, I don't know what's going on. I still don't know what's going on. I don't claim to know what's going on, but the whole polar back and forth, it's UFOs. It's not like people just getting crazy about it. And then I looked at the laws, and you did a show on it too, and people are missing the entire real context of what the drones, like, you should look at the laws and what's protecting these things before you start to become afraid of what's actually up there, you know?
The drone story is kind of like the story in South Korea with the plane crash. And it's actually, I'd say, probably pretty similar to this whole story that's unfolding about, you know, the mysterious fog all over the world. A lot of these stories just pop up, and the drone story is a little different because it's very, very, very visible and abnormal.
Right.
But these stories pop up, and then they get pushed on social media. The algorithms push them, and then everybody thinks that they have, you know, a clue about it because they listen to the news or they watched an influencer. And then when you try to present another point of view, the hive mind rejects it on both sides of the spectrum. And that's a problem. I mean, sure, we should be asking questions, and perspectives from different people are important. But when you bring something as a piece of proof to the table that really, you know, shows, okay, this might be more, this explains, for example, with the drones, this explains maybe what these things are more than all the speculation. A lot of folks would rather speculate than actually have the hard data.
Yeah.
We would prefer to speculate that they're aliens. Or like when we talked about these things being drones, I wondered, why is it that we're calling them drones? We don't know what they are. Aren't they?
They're UFOs.
Or UAPs, right?
Yeah.
So why are we using the term drones? And then if you were to, like, I got into this with several people about the drone story when I said, well, hold on a second. Okay, if these things are drones, let's just play around with that terminology. Okay, does that technology exist? And people were saying, well, no, it doesn't, because they're very large. Well, the U.S. government has very large drones. In fact, there's plenty of pictures of them online. There's even a project the U.S. military ran with the U.K. and Australia called Convergence. And that's where they used large vehicle-sized drones that could carry payloads and that had situational awareness via AI, which were learning in the experiment, in the test, to be able to evade detection. That is to say, they could maybe shut off their lights when they're detected, which is what was reported in New Jersey. And so, just as an example, I mean, Project Convergence, which you could look up, Joe, very easily, Project Convergence, U.S. military, those drones, which you can see pictures of, they function and operate exactly like the drones in New Jersey. Now, that doesn't mean that that's what it is. There's probably more than one thing going on. But it is a rational, logical, documented, hard, factual piece of proof that this technology is very human. At the very least, the technology is very human. It's probably not aliens. It's very human technology. It's probably the military. That's why they're not shooting them down over military bases, because they know what they are. They're running these programs, right? Whatever this is. And if it's AI that's training, well, I would assume they probably wouldn't tell the governor. They probably wouldn't tell certain people, because you want it to have the ability to learn from real world interaction and real world response. That's right. Just a thought. I'm not saying that's what it is, Joe. I'm just saying that's a thought. To me, that makes more sense than they're alien spaceships or they're alien drones that have been reverse engineered from our drones, which I've heard that makes no sense to me. But that doesn't, what it boils down to is what you said, emotion. That doesn't sell. What sells is somebody.
You know, the whole reason, I don't mean to cut you off, but the whole reason why they changed the word UFO to UAP is because of your emotions. That's why. Exactly.
And what sells? Me in my studio reading a military project, or me on a YouTube stream or some other video stream. A lot of girls do this because of their looks. People watch them. What sells? Me or one of those girls saying, I remote viewed the drones and they're actually aliens. No. And it's like, listen here, you don't remote view something that you know. That destroys the whole purpose of remote viewing. But yet that's what sells. What sells is it's Project Bluebeam. And then you tell people Project Bluebeam's not real. It was a theory proposed in the 1990s by a Canadian journalist. It's not a real thing. And they tell you, well, someone told a friend of mine, you need to have faith in Project Bluebeam. Like it's some kind of religion or something.
You need to have faith in it. Right.
Yes, you need to have faith. It doesn't exist. It's not real. It was a theory proposed in the 90s. It's not a real thing. So whatever those things are, I don't have a conclusion to it. But the way that we respond to that, it is, as you said, all based on emotion. A couple of other quick examples. When we had, hurricanes during hurricane season, a couple of months ago, we had a hurricane barreling toward Florida, and people were putting online that Florida, Tampa Bay, the area I grew up in, Joe, had a project called Phoenix. And they said Project Phoenix predicted this hurricane. And I said, Project Phoenix is over 10 years old, and Project Phoenix is actually about having small businesses prepare for a storm. It has nothing to do with being some kind of tabletop exercise preparing for a storm that's identical to what's going to hit Tampa. Totally different. I was told I'm a shill. I'm working for the government. The issue I have with this is just like the South Korean plane. The bodies in that plane were literally on fire still when the alternative media had a theory. It must have been DEI, or it must have been the deep state killing somebody that they didn't like on the plane, or maybe it was the White Hats killing somebody on, working at the deep state. It's like the plane literally is still on fire. You can't have an alternative narrative if you don't even have a mainstream narrative yet. All it is it's like a group of insects just like on top of each other, trying to get at the food, trying to get a little hit of the ad revenue, whether it's CNN or it's some alternative media, alternative video, radio, podcast, whatever show. There are so many of these hacks that just spread the most ridiculous, outlandish, ludicrous, crazy nonsense all the time, every day, and it discredits legitimate, independent thought, legitimate journalism. Like we've gone from, you think about people like Jim Mars or people like Graham Hancock,
mm-hmm.
Those people, where's the next generation of people like that? All you see is remote viewing the Miami Mall aliens. All you see is I vibrated with this crystal and now I'm attached to, some alien in some other dimension, and the alien is feeding me information, and I need to tell you what it is, but you're going to need to sign up for my course at $99.
$99,
so
$49.99, $99. Yeah, all right.
$99.99. Anyway, the point is the algorithms push that. So I don't know who it is, but somebody clearly wants you. Like if someone throws a brick through your window and you don't know who did it, the brick still got thrown through the window. I don't know who did it, but the window's broken. There's a brick and glass on the floor of my house, right? Yeah. I don't know who's doing it, but that's the kind of stuff that gets promoted on social media. That's the stuff that gets pushed by the algorithm because, again, it dominates your emotion, and it provokes a reaction. It's sensational. It's hyperbolic. And when you try to analyze it objectively, no one's interested in, maybe there was just a mechanical failure on a plane. Because if you look at planes, they're getting safer. And these things do happen. And when you put a camera on them, Joe, they seem like they're happening more often. When you take the camera away, There's still planes malfunctioning. You just don't see them until there's a big crash. And then suddenly it's a big conspiracy. Not everything, the bottom line is not everything's a conspiracy. Okay. And just because you don't know how things work doesn't mean everything's a conspiracy. And as per the fog conspiracy, fog mixed with pollution smells bad. The fog is not everywhere. That's as is being reported. And it's the middle of winter, so it's going to be foggy. It's going to be gray clouds in the sky, and it's going to be snowing because it's the middle of winter. And at the very least, if there is something suspicious, I just want to start with that baseline. Like, snow in the winter is not abnormal. That's natural, and that is something that if you live in those areas where it snows every year, that's normal because it's the winter. We don't have a baseline anymore in our society, Joe. We just react and believe whatever is the most sensational crap.
This is the nature of it. There are flat earthers getting paid $35,000 or more to get flown to Antarctica to make sure that the sun goes around Antarctica in a day. And even when they look and go, well, I might be wrong, we'll have to go back and check our facts. This is how much people are willing to not to say I was wrong in total. Like, they want to drive their point home. So, you know what it is? I think it's more emotions. You know why people are looking for a lie all the time? It's because if they feel like that in a sense keeps them in an unconscious way safe. It protects them. As long as they can look around and know that there are bad people and liars out there and keep pointing their finger and trying to find the deep liar all the time, somehow or another they feel safer about themselves. What really bothers me,
find it eventually.
Yes, and what really bothers me about this whole thing, like you mentioned, crystals, UFOs, all these things, dude, I'm a person that wants to find the truth out about lots of mysteries, the real truth. And all of this makes it incredibly hard, whether it's conscious exploration. What is the nature of crystals? Are there real cryptids, right? Like, what is this out-of-body experience? Even talking about the occult, if you noticed, I don't talk about it that much anymore. The waves of just pure shit make it incredibly hard for someone that really, really wants to know the truth. And it also does a massive injustice to the people that have been victims of these things that we talk about on a real level.
Yes.
You know?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. I got a great example for you. So you probably remember the fires in Lahaina. Remember the fires in Lahaina that burned all those homes and businesses?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that story was sold to the public as being a result of climate change. Mm. The alternative media sold it to the public as being a result of directed energy weapons, which, yes, they do exist. They're for disabling electronics and other things. You can read about them on defense contractor websites, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, etc. However, at the end of the day, this was actually quite recent. A government report was published, more of a municipal report, Lahaina, about what caused the fires. Didn't get any attention, but that report showed that it was the power lines, and it was the power company that was responsible. Now, you might say, well, you don't trust the government. Why would you trust the government? Well, the report didn't say climate change did it. The report said power company negligence did it. So I'm not saying that's the only thing that caused it, but at the end of the day, when that report comes out, it's not climate change. It's not directed energy weapons. It is human, however. It's human negligence. It's allowing that fire to burn and to destroy those homes and buildings. Whatever the reason might be, okay, whatever the end game might be, whatever the result of it might be, people buying up the oceanfront property, all of that can still happen. The responsible party, though, matters, because if you looked at what happened with that Paradise, California fire, PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, admitted in court, we did it, we're responsible. But guess what? They literally get away with murder, because we're sitting here talking about DEWs, Mountain Dew codes on cans of Mountain Dew at the dollar store, or we're talking about climate change. Both are nonsense, because people do really bad things, and then to prevent the public from learning about those bad things, the algorithms spread those conspiracies and push them. They spread the climate change nonsense and they spread the do nonsense. And guess who gets away with murder? Companies like PG&E, people that run the power lines down in Hawaii. They literally get away with murder. Now, there could be sinister motives, the end result of buying up the expensive land and all that. That's really secondary to the fact that people can get away with murder because we are too busy talking about Mountain Dew cans and what new conspiracy theory Mountain Dew, the company that sells Mountain Dew, is trying to tell us on their aluminum cans. Like, it's a joke. It's a mockery. It's very similar to the story of Paul Benowitz.
Well, hold on a second. Do you feel, does this frustrate you because, you know, you, in my opinion, you are one of the people that pioneered symbolism of corporations, right? So do you feel like people are missing the whole point, you know?
I think,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think missing the whole point. I think it's that for lack of an identified villain, but I don't want to have a particular company necessarily. But when people, let's say I ran a big news outlet, right? Let's say I ran CNN, and I knew in all the surveys nobody trusted me, right? Who trusts CNN? They have to pay airports to play them, right?
Yeah.
Nobody trusts CNN. Okay, maybe 10,000 people. So if I were CNN and I knew people didn't trust me, what I would do is I would just, I think this is really common sense, I would tell people the truth. And then people not trusting me would then say, well, that can't be the truth. CNN reported it, so it has to be fake. Then the public will make up the lie. The public will make up the story. And the alternative media, as an alternative to a CNN, will then create an automatic alternative narrative. You're already seeing this happen in real time with the bird flu. H5N1, hardly any really substantial reporting. A couple doctors on TV, a couple lying hacks and propagandists. Nothing substantial. You got a guy in Louisiana. He's 65 years plus, multiple underlying health conditions, no evidence of an actual virus, no distinct symptoms, all official from the CDC, and yet the reports are completely contrary to what the CDC is actually reporting. The point of what I'm getting at is that's what the mainstream media is pushing. And then the alternative media, without any other information, begins to push, oh, it came from a biolab in Georgia. How can you say that when the CDC doesn't even have a narrative put together yet? There's no narrative to combat. This is the problem. We don't trust a source of information. So at least, is it possible, is it maybe hypothetically, theoretically, could that mainline source of information, including the White House, just tell the public something pretty close to the truth? And because the public doesn't trust the government, the public doesn't trust the media, the public will then create a false story. And then the responsibility is not on the White House, right? It's not on the government. It's not on the media. It's on you. They have plausible deniability now. You created the narrative. You created the quote-unquote conspiracy, and you created this alternative reality. And meanwhile, there's people like us that are sitting here saying, I think you're both wrong, and the massive majority don't want to hear it because they still believe the mainstream media or the alternative media. How can you dare say that InfoWars is not telling the truth? They're the alternative media. Well, it's not that they're lying necessarily, but they have a narrative to push. And that's the bottom line. If you're pushing a narrative and really, really, really trying to get people to believe this narrative, and you ostracize and condemn and censor people who have a question about it, that's not a trustworthy source of information. Look at what happened to David Knight working at InfoWars. Same exact kind of a thing. And this is all very dangerous, and it's all, again, partly based on emotion, like you were talking about, and it applies to every subject: disease, UFOs, wildfires, everything. Because this is like a psychological disease, and this is not universal around the world. Like, I have listeners in other countries, and know people in other countries, from Russia to Australia to Japan. Most people, and hell, Saudi Arabia, most people do not think like this around the world. This is a distinctly psychological thing that is corrupting the minds of Americans. I mean, yeah, it does affect people elsewhere in the world. There's with TikTok and social media in China and their influencer farms. I'm saying that the conditions in America are quite distinct. It's a psychological attack. I don't know if it's the CIA. I don't know if it's another country. I don't know what it is, but it is destroying our ability to exist.
Man, to me, it's like a baby. We've become, I hate to even say this, but we've become babies. And if you've had a child, you know what happens. Like everybody's focused on the child and you spoil the child. And now everybody's moving around trying to either fix the spoiled child or react to the spoiled child. And that's what we've become as a society in this country.
That's why I love you, Joe, because I try to get all of these details and sources, and then I try to explain them all and link them all together. And then you just come in and say, well, it's like an infant, and we react and then act and then react in it. Like you summarize it very well.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
And you know what? Like I have a deep love for truth seeking, not for the same reasons that I think a lot of people do. I don't know, but I just don't think it is. I have a deep love for conscious exploration and a deep love for our history. And if people really looked at our forefathers and what they planned on to, if they, like the big question is, Ryan, is if they woke up in the year 2025 and looked around, and this is before we get into the fact that, yeah, they were involved in the esoteric and the occult, and yeah, they understood its deeper meanings, and there's a deeper, bigger conversation that needs to happen there before, but we're still dealing with people's emotions. But if they woke up and looked around, I think every single one of them, even the ones that disagreed with each other on both sides of the fence, would be rolling in their graves, all of them. I really do, man.
I agree with you. I think that when we talk about our founding fathers in America, one, we have to be careful not to romanticize them. They're just people,
yep.
And they had disagreements and whatnot. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if there's anything that can be taken from that statement, founding fathers, it's that they had different points of view and things they disagreed on, but they did agree on one thing. They agreed that there should be an underlying liberty, and that should include all people. And when people today in 2024, 2025 say things like, well, they didn't mean white people, or they didn't mean this group of people, or no, it meant all people. There were oppositional forces to that. And it's a miracle, truly. There's a great book called A Miracle at Philadelphia. It really is truly a miracle that this country was founded in the capacity that it was, considering the opposition to the notion that everybody is equal and everybody deserves these rights. And this is a safe haven for people who are persecuted and oppressed anywhere in the world. But ultimately, yes, it's just like with Nazism. These people that act like Nazis today and talk about, like these, like the true neo-Nazis. I don't really know many of them. I don't think I've ever really met a real neo-Nazi. But if the image of the neo-Nazi covered in tattoos, wearing these black masks, whatever our perception of them is, Hitler would have had them rounded up. Those aren't Nazis. It's the same thing with people that talk about democracy. Our perception of democracy is like, oh, it's equitable and it's all for the betterment of society. It's like, no. Democracy is emotion. It's 51% deciding that 49% lose their rights. That's not what this country is. It's not a democracy. I think part of the problem is we don't learn anything about the founding of our country. We don't learn anything about even more recent things in American history, like really important events. We learn, even taking AP history, I learned virtually nothing in school. Our education system is wrecked. Our economic system seems wrecked, although it's a reserve currency, so it still stands pretty strong. Like the country is falling apart, and we're arguing over what kind of leader we want to take the ship down. And you said it's all based on emotions.
Mm-hmm.
People leave because they're offended that someone would dare to question the glorious leader. You know what kind of behavior that is? That's North Korean behavior. And you know what the scary thing is? People that want to do the right thing those people are the ones that have to be the most cautious of the influences of the wicked and the evil. And let's just to encapsulate it, the devil. People that want to do the right thing are going to be the ones that the devil is going to try to corrupt. The devil tempted Jesus, right? Offered him all the kingdoms of the world, right? That's who the devil's tempt. The devil isn't going to tempt the porn addict, drug addict, okay? The devil's going to tempt the person that's going to church and trying to do the right thing. That's who the devil's coming after. That's why the devil has infiltrated and corrupted the churches. So if you're going to try to do the right thing, you have to understand, I think, historically, too, if you look at the Roman Republic, when the emperor, when Octavianus obtained power, that was the end of it. There wasn't any going back. When senators tried to go back to the old republic, they were threatened, paid off, people were killed. When emperors even, although they didn't call them emperors, when emperors or Augustuses tried to go back to more republican ideals, the people rebelled. When that power is invoked, it's lost. Everything's lost. So as an example, I agree with deporting all illegal immigrants. That's my opinion. Families, get them all out of the country. If you're here illegally, get them all out of the country. That's my opinion. But when you invoke that power, understand that there's no putting that back in Pandora's box. Once that box is open, that's it. Just like with the warrantless wiretapping and the spying, that didn't get put back in the box, did it? Just like with the drone programs under Obama, that didn't get put back in the box, did it? And now, if we have a mass deportation policy, that's not going to get put back in the box. And that will eventually, like all the spy equipment and all the drones and all the machines and things we use in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're just brought back home and the chickens come home to roost. That's what's going to happen when you invoke those powers. All emergency powers, that's what happens. This country's in a permanent state of emergency. Our society is in a permanent state of emergency. I'm surprised that people can even think on the level that they do. I'm surprised I or you or anybody listening can even think. Like, every day it's some kind of psychological trauma that we're subjected to. Like, we're being tortured 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the funny thing is, we welcome it. We open our phones. We look for those things. They call it doom scrolling. Like, we're looking to be traumatized. It's some kind of weird, like, masochistic, sadistic thing. I don't know, man. It's
I did a show
scary
on that. Like, why are we addicted to our fear? And in a sense, if you can identify, that's what I'm saying. If you can identify the villain, or if you can prove to yourself that there's a deep, dark villain somewhere all the time, then on some level it keeps you safe versus having to take a risk. Because here's the thing. How many people are really going to truly individuate, authenticate, keep the golden rule when they're faced with a crowd of people that don't agree with them? I mean, that hasn't changed, whether it's the internet or the old age where we don't have technology. On some, we just keep bowing out. We keep bowing out when that happens. Oh, this person's a narcissist. This person's an empath, or this leader and that leader. And really, on some level, you've decided to stop thinking for yourself and stop taking responsibility for yourself. You know, you just want to just jump into a crowd. I need something to validate my emotions. And that's all it is, man. You know?
Yes. When I was in Hiroshima, I went to all the memorials, the Peace Memorial, the bomb dome and all that. And I went to the museums and whatnot. And Hiroshima was my favorite city when I was in Japan, Joe. I don't know how much I told you about it, but Hiroshima was just, it was like kind of like dark, but then light. It was like peaceful, but then like also kind of felt horrifying at the same time. Like you could feel the energy and the peace. You could feel all of that. It's a really interesting city. But while I was there, I came into contact with some protesters, which are really rare in Japan, but there are protesters, and the Japanese government does, arrest people and put people in jail, and they have their own level of oppression there to some extent. But these protesters, my point is, they were peace protesters. And initially I thought that they were like super left wing because they were protesting against Israel. And I thought, my God, I flew across the ocean and I took a train and I took, cars and cabs, and I get to a place and I still have to hear about Israel. And then I realized when I talked to them, they weren't opposed to Israel for some like politically liberal reason that mirrors what we have here in the United States, which is a fraud in and of itself. because the Democrats get 50% of their money from Israel. That's well documented. But they were also opposed to Ukraine and giving more money to the Ukraine because the U.S. government really controls Japanese foreign policy, and where Japanese money goes, it goes to Ukraine. So I was standing there talking to this guy, and I'm sure I didn't agree with them on a lot of political things, but they were just a peace protest. That wasn't left-wing, it wasn't right-wing. They just said, we don't want government to be financing these wars. There's no reason for Japan to be involved in Ukraine. There's certainly no reason for Japan to be involved in Israel or dealing with that. We don't want to be dragged into a war with Russia. They said we don't want to be dragged into a war with China, which is the big issue. We don't want to be dragged into a war in the Middle East. We don't, like, those religions don't even really exist in Japan. Like, there are Christians, but it's not the same thing here as we have here in the West. Like, they don't want to deal with any of that. And having that experience of, like, they're anti-war, which there are plenty of anti-war protesters in the U.S., but usually they're super politically motivated. All the anti-war protesters when I was growing up were all anti-George Bush. They were super liberal. Obama takes office, and all of them disappear. But just getting that perspective, that's how I think. I'm like, there's no reason to be doing what we're doing in Ukraine, no reason to be doing what we're doing in Israel. But when you say that to people interpret that as being, well, you must be in favor of Ukrainians being killed by the evil Russians. You must be in favor of Israel being destroyed by Hamas. And those are two sides of the same coin. And when you follow the money, you find out it's not just two sides of the same coin, it's the same side of the same coin. It just appears as if it's on two sides. And when you take a stance against that, well, as in my case, you get banned from several radio networks. But in that is an example, I think, of what we're talking about, is that you either have a belief and you have faith in something that is acceptable, and if you step outside of those boundaries, you're ostracized, even if, like, for example, in my experience, talking to Buddhists are more Christian than a lot of Christians I know. Talking to Muslims are more Christian than many Christians I know. I'm not saying that because I hate Christians and I love Muslims. I'm saying everybody is really the same, ultimately, when you break it down. We don't want to go to war. We just want to live in peace. We want to worship whatever God we want to worship, and we want to just live in relative harmony with other people. It doesn't matter if you're American, right? Exactly. If you're American, if you're Arab, if you're Japanese, even if you're Chinese, it doesn't matter. Whatever, we just want to live in harmony and peace. Israeli, most people, I think, feel that way. And people's emotions who want to do the right thing, we got to defend the kids, we got to defend this group or that, we defend the Ukrainians, whatever, that gets played on, right? And it gets corrupted. And then literally money, life, and energy is sucked out of people to finance and to fuel the murder and the genocide of people around the world. And so this is ultimately where I take that long path all the way around. When I look at Trump's incoming administration, for example, and when he's packed it with people that ultimately, all of them, every one of them down the list, you name them, every single one of them, including Tulsi Gabbard, who was anti-war. I used to like her. Pro-war with Iran, all reading the same talking points. And I can play every one of the audio clips of every one of the people he's picked, including the guy who is making a lot of the decisions. His name, I believe, is Lutnick. He's the Commerce Secretary that Trump picked. And he's making most of the decisions with Jared Kushner, who has an allegiance to Israel over the United States. And when I see these people coming into office, and I see that they're all hardcore pro-Israel, hardcore anti-Iran, I say, whatever your religious views are okay, or political views are okay. But I don't want to go to war with Islam. I don't want to go to war with Arabs.
You said it,
I don't want to go to war.
And I like
with
how
anybody.
I like how you influence that word. I still have a say so in this. I don't want. You're not going to sway me in a polar sense. I don't know why that people don't understand this. With as much esoteric knowledge as there is on the internet, if you this polar mindset that you're talking about, if I don't agree with this, then I must be the adversary. Like, it's 2025, man. We got to let go of that. We got to put things into context. Yeah, I remember going on that show with you, and I've got friends that were on that show with like Hotep Jesus and other people, and they were just, well, if you're a magician, how come you're not making a bunch of money? Or, and some guy was telling you, well, if you're talking about the cross, it's either this or it's that. And it's like, don't you understand that the founding fathers, most of them are Freemasons, by the way, and lots of people that grow nations understand the polarity of the mob. Like, they understand that fundamental thing's not going to change because we haven't increased in consciousness yet to change it. That's what's sad to me. That's the saddest
many
thing,
of our
man.
founders, it is sad, I agree with you, Joe, and many of our founders were agnostic about these questions. And if you read their writings, this was founded first and foremost as a nation that would be an asylum for people that were experiencing both political and religious persecution.
Yeah.
So here's
exactly.
here's the problem. Yes, to tie that together with what I was saying about war, when you, for example, you have this guy Pete Hegseth who Trump picked to run the Pentagon. The guy is tattooed literally with crusader symbols. He's a literal crusader. He even wrote a book about it. He wants to, in his own words, he wants to go to war with Islamicists, who he says are incompatible with America. Muslims are incompatible with America because they group them all into one giant group, even though 90% of Muslims believe all the things Christians believe. The point being, not that this needs to be political, Joe, but the point being is that you have radical zealots that want to kill people. It doesn't matter if they're Christian or if they're Muslim or if they're Jews. There's plenty of Jews that are radicals that want to kill people. Christians are first and foremost on that list because you see what they do to Christians in Israel. They spit on them. They see what they do in Lebanon. They bomb them, and they see what they do in Syria. They round them up and execute them. So I don't want war, and I don't want to go to war with anybody, Arabs or anybody, unless someone's directly attacking me. When you have an attack in New Orleans and they blame it on ISIS and now supposedly one in, Vegas, what does that do with the incoming administration? It justifies, well, it's got to be Iran. Someone tries to kill Trump. Oh, it's got to be Iran. Just like with 9/11. Oh, it's got to be Iraq. It's got to be this country. Iran did it. It's always the Muslims, because Israel has incredible control of our foreign policy. Japanese know it. I go to Hiroshima, and they know that the U.S. government's controlled by Israel, and that influences Japanese policy. Americans don't understand it because we don't hear that in our media, because everything tells us the exact opposite, that Israel's totally innocent and that we have to defend them because Christians and God's chosen people and all of that. I guess the essence of what I'm trying to get at here is, yes, I don't want war. And when you're talking about something like having hope in the incoming administration, hope is what a dying, nation or a failing people rely on, and hope's not necessarily a bad thing.
You don't think that I don't have hope in the incoming administration. I'm hoping that the people themselves, we're the ones running the show, like you said before. I'm hoping that the people themselves will wake up consciously. That's what I'm hoping for. I know that seems even probably, gloomier to you for that to happen, but that's what I'm hoping. The reason why we're going through all this chaos and stupidity and stuff, we created the internet, we created this thing, is I do believe, and I know it sounds super esoteric and unbelievable, but I think this is part of the process of waking the hell up. We have some kind of weird thing where we literally have to suffer to the point of beyond stupidity as a society before we wake up to things like what you're talking about, And I'm hoping that the internet and the age of technology will help it, while at the same time we try to keep everything under wraps. It doesn't seem like it's going to, but I think it will eventually.
Well, that's where my hope comes into. It's just, again, I see it slightly differently, but my hope is in the fact that there will be really bad things, really bad stuff. And I say because I divorced myself from it, and I refuse to participate in it. And I refuse to even pay lip service to the idea for a couple of clicks and a couple of dollars in ad revenue. But ultimately, my hope comes from the fact that the bad will happen, but so will the good. And if you look at the founding principles of America, that American spirit can exist anywhere in the world. Just like there are Freemasons who are in a lodge who are not really Freemasons, Manly P. Hall says, and there are Freemasons that are not in a lodge who are true Freemasons. There are Americans that are born in America who are not truly Americans in spirit. And there are people that are born in villages in other countries in remote areas that have more of the American spirit than we do here in America. I mean, people can laugh about it, but the Russian government has a policy that, and Putin signed it as a decree. People mock it and laugh at it, but I don't think it's a joke. But they said if you are wanting to escape the persecution of these extremist left-wing policies, come to Russia. We will help you to assimilate to our culture. That is the spirit of America. That is almost in line directly with what James Madison and Hamilton and Jefferson wrote in the founding, discussions and papers and meetings. That means that Russia can have more of the spirit of America than America does. Japan's immigration policies, for example, those are more American than our policies are here today in this country. The point is, America as a country, it's the spirit, right? It's the spirit. Just like people say God. And you can have God in a prison cell with no food. You can have the spirit of America, whether you're in the country or you're out of the country. And that spirit is what gives me hope, because that fire that we can all preserve is something that nobody can beat out of us. Nobody can shoot it. Nobody can destroy it. Nobody can imprison it. It's eternal. That's the only hope that I have. Call it God, call it the American spirit, call it whatever. But I think that, recognizing that, shows us how much more related to one another we are. And just like when I said, I don't want to go to war with the Arabs, that's why I'm pissed at the incoming political administration and all of the Zionists and Israel. It's not because I'm an anti-Semite. Arabs are Semites. It's because I don't want to go to war and kill innocent people. I don't hate Arabs. I don't hate Jews. We have to take this long way around to understand this, because everything is so polarized, and there's so much conditioning, and there's so much dichotomy in everything. But if we sit down and take the time to try to really focus on what's happening, I think we can all come to an agreement that we have a lot more in common than we have different. And
absolutely.
that we should be trying to find those commonalities rather than looking at how different we are and wanting to go in crusades with people that we don't like. That's not America. That's not Christian. That is anti-American, and that is freaking evil.
Well, it is evil. And when we created this country, they said we hold these truths to be self-evident, right?
Exactly.
Like what you just said is a self-evident truth. It should be self-evident. All people are created equal. We all should live in a loving spirit via the golden rule, and we all should care about the truth and respect each other. And that's not happening. We live in an influencer society nowadays. That's what we live in. Everything is based around, and I'll say it again and I'll stop saying it, but everything is based around the validation of the mob's emotions. And now all the mobs are sub-niches of different groups. So in a sense, that makes intelligence even easier. They don't have to go to war. We don't have to run on the ground and shoot at each other or anything anymore. All they have to do is just start poking at your emotions. Just like somebody that would do, like they'd gaslight you. Everybody's talking about narcissism and gaslighting, but you don't see that it happens to you on a bigger level constantly. Just poke the bear, just manipulate the emotions, just finesse them a little bit. It's an intelligence war above anything and everything. That's what we're in now,
Yes, it is an intelligence war. You could think of it as an analogy. Think of it like the Death Star in Star Wars. If America is the Death Star, we think it's impenetrable. We think that it's just going to be there. Nobody can destroy it. But there's a little tiny hole, little design flaw. And I think that our design flaw is that if you read the founding documents and you read what our founding fathers said, this whole thing only works because people are educated, people are informed, people are respectable and responsible and are hard workers, and people, above all else, have morals. And if you don't have those things, no amount of parchment paper, no amount of judges and politicians with slick back hair, none of that matters. And that's, I think, the problem. Really evil people, and we could start with the Soviet Union, they fired a couple torpedoes down into that little hole, and the whole thing blew up. The whole system doesn't work. The Constitution is worthless if the people are not moral and have a compass that directs them toward what is good. And what is good is, you can call it God, whatever you want to call it, but it's the divine plan. Call that God, call that whatever. The divine plan means it's just working within the confines of nature, respecting each other, being responsible, all of those things that Pythagoras called harmony. Living in harmony with one another, which is why I said, and people got very angry at me, when I was in Japan, Joe, the Japanese are more American than we are. I mean, Russians are more American.
You found some people that have some actual scruples, huh? Yeah?
Yes. Education and respect. That's how it works. If you don't have that, the Constitution is a roll of toilet paper.
Well, I admire, by the way, I want to congratulate you on your I saw your Facebook post, and that's congratulations. You took your happiness into your own hands. And again, that's what we all should do. If everybody takes their happiness into their own hands, and I don't mean the spiritual idea that's being pushed right now in the new age, which is, if it doesn't serve you, trash it. Well, what happened to the serving the people, like serving others? There is no great spiritual leader that ever said that, ever. If it doesn't serve you, throw it away. Never. I don't know how that even started, but it's not a real thing spiritually. A spiritual thing is seeing the oneness in everybody, like you just said, and treating each other via the golden rule, and then taking your happiness into your own hands and becoming abundant so that for the reasons of being able to give and help and love others. It's not saying that you can't enjoy your life. Of course you should enjoy your life. Of course you deserve love and abundance and all these things, but no one's going to hand them to you. You have to take that stuff into your own hands, and I think the internet has spoiled us in a lot of ways, for sure. Not just,
well, it's been a great,
not just emotionally, but in other ways too,
It's been a great source of information. It is a great source of information, but it's also a great source of disinformation, right?
Yeah.
There's that balance, that natural balance between the two. Thank you for the congratulations.
Yeah, brother.
I appreciate that.
I mean, I know you're struggling that. I have the same struggle. Lots of people have the same struggle in trying to find love and friendships and partners and people that actually will, not treat you like you're some kind of used car or something, that you come with these features. And if you don't have these features or whatever the hell you're being taught nowadays and being socially engineered to think so other people can sell products and, build their empires. On a deep level, I do still believe that everybody wants to love genuinely and be loved genuinely and live a good and fruitful life. And I do feel like how you feel like we're really far away from it. But at the same time, when people like P. Diddy and others, that they seem to be invincible, I still have hope in the truth. Because in the end, and I hope I'm right about this, I could be wrong, but I would like to believe from the bottom of my heart that the truth will always prevail. It may take time sometimes, but that it will,
Truth is a peculiar thing, too, because if you read the writings of Plato talked about how truth is something that is kind of elusive. He referred to truth as something that we can never really know. And the modern New Age movement has taken that to become, we can never know the truth. It's become postmodernism, right? Nothing is true. Everything, your emotions are more important. But that's really a corrupting of what Plato said. Plato also gave us the idea of when we die and then we're born again, we're resurrected or reincarnated, that the soul has its memory wiped. Well, that's one of the tenets of the same New Age movement today. A lot of the things that Plato wrote about, the truth, for example, or life and death, have been turned into a cult today. And if you look at the idea of the truth, this elusive thing, it's been redefined. Generally speaking, as a society, we have words that are defined by a dictionary that can change over time. We have words that, even if they're defined by a dictionary to mean one thing, socially, culturally, politically, they mean something different. One of the, I think, a really good example, one of the best examples of this, in my opinion, is that line, that statement, the separation of church and state. And people that have good intention use that statement all the time. We've got to have a separation of church and state. There's no documentation of that. That's not the Declaration of Independence. That's not the U.S. Constitution. And it doesn't mean what people quote it to mean, which means two things. One, we're basing a lot of our political arguments on misconceptions and things that are out of context, even if we have, the intention to do the right thing, which most people, I believe, do. That's the one hope I have in humanity. But the other thing is, that comes from a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1802, and he was writing it relating to some Christians about the First Amendment. And what it means is, yes, you can have the Ten Commandments in a classroom. You just can't force people to be a Christian. You can teach people about Hindu gods. You just can't force people to be a Hindu. You also can't do the opposite. You can't stop Christians from being Christian, and you can't stop Hindus from being Hindu. So when you are talking today, not you, Joe, but the general you, when people are talking today about deporting J.D. Vance's wife, I can't stand J.D. Vance, for the record, but deporting his wife or deporting Vivek or whatever because they're Indian and that's incompatible with our culture, that is the antithesis of what our founders wrote. That is the antithesis of America. Yes, people abuse our country. Yes, politicians abuse it. But the foundation of this country is it's a safe haven for the oppressed and persecuted. And there's a way to look at that in a balanced manner, where we don't let extremes of emotions dictate to us. But if we're not taught those things, like church and state is not one of the, it's not in the Bill of Rights. I mean, it's the First Amendment, but that's not what it meant when we used the word. It has nothing to do with anything with the Constitution. It was a random letter that was written by a former president. That's all that it is. And we base whole political discussions on something that is, frankly, quite fictitious. And that's another part of the problem. A lot of the arguments and debates we have, fictitious. Look at, like you mentioned, the influencers. What's one of the big debates right now? Whether what's that woman's name? Sydney Sweeney.
Yeah.
Whether she's attractive or not. That's a huge debate online. That's the kind of stuff. It's like the influencer farms in China. It's like TikTok, where TikTok gives us crap, and they give China math, engineering, science, philosophy, and history. That's the problem. And like I said, this is not all universal, but we as Americans are exporting not just our poor diets and health and all that. We're exporting the poisoned culture to other countries as well. So we need to educate ourselves. And I guess my goal, to be, quote, positive, would be to suggest that when you hear something like church and state, go find the source of it before you speak on it as an expert. There are many things like I have no clue about, and I go try to learn about them and find out what the source of them were. Go to the actual source of whatever the topic might be, the quote, whatever. A lot of things are taken out of context. Even the thing in the Bible about Lucifer. They're not talking about the devil. They're talking about a king of Babylon in that book of Isaiah.
All of that stuff was agreed upon by people. Oh, that means the devil. So 10 men got in a room and said that verse meant the devil. So now it's the devil indefinitely, all the way down to your soul. It doesn't. If your soul's being influenced like that, shouldn't that scare you more than the devil? Wouldn't you think? Like, if you tell them the truth of that word, Lucifer, where it came from, people don't want to let that go. They have an unconscious investment all the way down to their core and what it actually means. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I like to, you and I don't agree on a lot of things, by the way. I think Ryan and I are a perfect example of two people that don't live the same way, don't agree on a lot of things, but still yet we're really good friends. You don't see that.
You don't eat broccoli. I eat broccoli.
Yeah, I mean, I'll eat it sometimes, but it's got to be covered in cheese and crap, So,
yeah.
but
Sorry, go ahead.
Joseph Carrera says, there are tons of dumb people, and there's people who will continue to take advantage of dumb people. And if it may always be this way, and it may always be that way. And I think he's saying that from a point of view of like, from a place of hope that he hopes that it won't always be that way, that we won't always be so influenced. And I understand where he's coming from, but I think other people misinterpret this show, and one of the bigger reasons, selfish reasons why I bring you on here is when I talk about conscious exploration, it isn't to escape the prison planet. You ever hear that, Ryan? Like, what do you think about that? Like, I get this a lot. Oh, yeah, I love your show. You talk about conscious exploration, and then they project something I'm not even talking about, their Gnostic point of view of escaping the prison planet from the demiurge or whatever. And it's like, no, man, I'm not here to run from it. I'm here. I want to fix it. You know, does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, I think that's a big problem too.
Oh, it totally is. In fact, that also comes out of the writings of Plato, because Plato wrote about demiurgos, and that is the later to be, I think, misunderstood Gnostic demiurge, Aeldebaoth.
Yeah.
That's a really good subject. But no, I agree with you. I think that to understand it and to work with it, as opposed to trying to escape it, I think that's like a weird pollution of Western and Eastern philosophy. Because you can read, into it and learn about Plato and the demiurgos, or you can read into Buddhism. And one of the key pillars of Buddhism is that life is suffering, and that the whole point of life is to live in harmony and to eventually escape the suffering. Now, personally, you and I actually probably do agree on this more than you might think. I don't think life is inherently suffering as an absolute.
No.
I don't think life is inherent. Yeah, so I think we agree on that. I don't think life is inherently good either, per se. I think life is almost neutral. And I agree with the Taoist concept of, the two dragons and the black and the white. Not literal dragons, obviously.
Right.
It's a symbol. But,
yeah.
The dueling energies.
Yeah.
Life is. God is. And another example, I understand, not in terms of violence, but I understand why Jews don't like Jesus, because if they interpret Jesus as a person who lived, who said, I am God, and did not understand that to be a metaphor and understood it to be literal, then you would probably call for him to be crucified. And I understand why Muslims get really angry. I don't agree with the violence, but I understand why Muslims get angry when you depict Allah or Muhammad, because you're depicting the absolute, and you can't reduce the absolute to something, finite, or rather I should say the all to something that is, identifiable, because it's unidentifiable. You don't know the name of it, or we only have the name of it. We don't know what it is. We can't define what it is. It doesn't have which goes back to Plato when he talks about the truth in God. It's not something you can define. It doesn't mean that we can't learn the truth of basic things like, hey, you should wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. That should be a truism, but the idea that there is some higher authority or some higher power, creation, energy, whatever you want to call it, to depict that really is kind of profanity. And I believe that the Christian depictions of Jesus are profane. I think that they are profanity, and I think that they are highly offensive, and to me, they're sacrilegious. But that doesn't mean that I hate Christians. I guess my point is, to answer your question very simply, I know I ramble and I apologize for that, but to answer your question very simply, yeah, there's a problem with that, because that idea that you're talking about of escaping the prison planet and escaping the demiurges, as far as I'm concerned, Joe, I think that reeks of atheism. I think it reeks of purposelessness. I think it reeks of, maybe for lack of a better term, Satanism. It reeks of a kind of hopeless, suicidal ideology. Like, life is just so miserable. We're in prison here. Let's just escape by killing ourselves, and who cares? That's a very nihilistic, fatalistic way to look at the world. And that's not how Buddhists see it either, by the way. But that's just, I think that's taken misconceived Platonic writings and misconceived, misunderstood, misrepresented Buddhist teachings, and it's taking them to a literal extreme.
Yeah. I mean, I do have hope for the conscious explorers out there in some sense because of the internet. Like there's a new podcast I just listened to because of one of our listeners, Bryce, called the Telepathy Tapes. It's based on uh, real information, real accounts of people doing things, the way that they experiment with it. It's funny to me because I can see people experimenting with things consciously, you know, to try to find the truth. And it's a very blurry thing, conscious exploration. It's not as real as like when you hear, well, there's this dimension and 15 dimensions and all this other stuff. Like when people actually do conscious exploration, things get blurry when they get down into it, right? To try to find the truth. And we get there through smaller steps, right? And every little goal or little barrier that we break consciously, humanity seems to catch up. So now they're realizing that certain people do have like telepathic connections, and these things are real, but not to this fanatical, sensational extent to what we're being taught or sold in the new age. I'm not saying that there aren't cases that where people have extraordinary gifts. I'm sure there is, but I think it's my hope that the conscious explorers will help this come together if they really do care about the truth enough. The problem is the political shit, the media shit, and everybody running around like Night Stalker mentioned that, you know, morality and self-evident truths are actually subjective. And that's causing problems even for our group of conscious explorers, you know.
Well, if you think about just the history of like podcasting, right? Like I've done this 15 plus years, and I was doing this before podcasting was really, I mean, anything like it is now. And I started out on terrestrial radio.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really know anything. I think I probably know less today than I did back then. But I watched as that, I guess this field of radio, podcasts, whatever, has gotten oversaturated, overrun. It's been flooded with just chatter. And if you were going to, I guess if we go back, we're going to go back to what we were talking about earlier, just for a moment, about how the ideas of, we're talking about, I guess, government, or we're talking about institutions or the media, whatever, trying to muddy the waters of something. Having a free, open internet is great for freedom. It's great for learning and expression, but it creates the opposite of that, right?
Sure.
And then that can be weaponized and that can be exploited. And we've seen that with the U.S. military, with ufology going back to the 50s. We saw that with the Paul Benowitz story, where here's a guy who's trying to figure something out about a military base. He's coming too close to it, so they start putting this information on his computer about all the typical UFO mythology that we know today. A lot of that came from the NSA, literally putting stories into Paul Benowitz's computer and driving the guy mad and driving him crazy. And you see that kind of expressed today through QAnon. You see it expressed today through the, quote, truth movement. You see it expressed today through the MAGA movement and through the anti-MAGA movement, giving people something to hold on to as a hero, giving people a villain. Like playing, Carl Jung would have probably a lot of fun today going through all the different layers of the psyche and all the psychology of how all of this stuff works.
Oh, man. Don't you think he'd be a little worried? Like you guys didn't learn anything that I taught, you know?
No, exactly. And I think that ultimately is the point, is that what people like Carl Jung pioneered and what people like Edward Bernays pioneered, Carl Jung in the field of psychology, Bernays in the field of propaganda, similar fields. Ultimately, all of that has just been weaponized. That's what's happened. All of that has been weaponized. From selling you jeans and soda, to selling you political movements, to selling you new age religious, whatever it is. All of that has been weaponized and exploited. And people's goodwill and good intention, which again is my hope and my positivity, I think people want to do the right thing, even if they're influenced by misconceptions and misunderstandings. All of us are. I think all of that has been weaponized. And I think that's one of the core problems of what we face and what we deal with. And the weaponization of that includes, again, using things overseas that have come home to roost. like sock puppet accounts. The U.S. military used sock puppet accounts over in Afghanistan. Then they brought them home. And the sock puppet account is when you have government officials running multiple social media accounts. Now they can do this with AI, I'm sure. And now, of course, they have influencer farms and whatnot. But this is where you'll have maybe 20, 30 people you're talking to online. They can all be the same exact person. And that could be one government agent, two government agents. Not like you're a special person. These are just disinfo agents. Or these are people that are poking and prodding the internet to see what people are talking about. The government can learn sometimes from us more than we can learn from them. They might not know something, so they go into a social media platform and see what are the people saying. The way that they acquire all this data and information and the pattern recognition and being able to know what people are going to do before they do it. Like, I don't know if there is much free will. I don't know. I think we might have sold our free will for conveniences and for instant gratification and for entertainment. Because so much of what we do is influenced by the algorithm, Joe.
That's why I dip out, man. I honestly do on purpose. When we have discussions, and you're like, "Did you hear of this or did you hear of that?" And I know it's sad because I do a show, but it's not that it robs my peace and I bury my head in my sand because I just want to feel good. It's that it literally. I'm aware of my unconscious. We can be super intelligent people, but the fact remains, and Carl Jung and lots of other people taught us this, that we focus on one thing at a time. Our consciousness just lasers in on things. It's very fast. But in the meantime, our unconscious is running the show and taking in everything. So we have to be aware of our programming. And we're not even aware of how polarity works. Right? Like they're still using polarity to manipulate us. And when I say they, I don't mean the government. I mean everybody, from individuals to the government to influencers to intelligence agencies. Like if you can't wrap your head around these, I don't even know why they're considered a cult, but still, they're still occult ideas that need to be understood in the mainstream now. It isn't always this or that. We can't get past that.
Yeah, and I think a good example of that, it might seem off topic, but a good example of that is like marriage. We know that marriage is a big problem in the U.S. We know it's a big problem anywhere in the world, not just marriage, but more so people having kids, contrary to all the overpopulation talk that we've heard for decades. But the idea of marriage, like when women get married and then, a husband is abusive, and then the woman, leaves her husband, and then people on the more traditional side of things will say, well, you shouldn't have left your husband, even if he was abusive. And I disagree with that. But when you look at how the church frames it or how pastors frame it, they'll frame it as, well, the wife is supposed to be submissive to the husband. It doesn't leave any room for the context of two things. One, what if the wife is being submissive to a husband who is physically and emotionally violent and abusive? Or two, that if you finish reading that section of the Bible, it also says, like in the next sentence, that a husband must provide the same for the wife. And if the husband is not, because he's beating her or emotionally abusing her or whatever the case is, then she doesn't need to be submissive to somebody like that. That voids the marriage contract spiritually and also, of course, I think legally as well. It voids it and violates. But that's not what they teach.
Yeah,
a lot of Christian women are taught, if your husband beats you, cheats on you, lies to you, does drugs, whatever, you got to stay with him. That's what God would want. And that's a corruption of what the Bible says. And it's the same thing if it's the opposite. If it's a man who's having those experiences with a woman, it's a corruption of the Bible. Just like when everything in politics, it's a corruption of the actual Constitution, a corruption of what our founding fathers wrote. It's the same thing with ufology. So much of what we discuss, drones or UAPs or whatever, it's a corruption of the mythos of it, a corruption of the psychology of it. How many people know that? Jack Ballet pointed this out famously. How many people know that the whole of the UFO narrative, the mythology, everything, abductions, flying saucers, and all of that, Carl Jung pointed this out too, that it all aligns directly with the ancient fairy lore. It all aligns directly going back tens of thousands of years to the shamanic tradition, people being kidnapped, taken to other places, having implants, being experimented on. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, that implies that there's something more than just drones flying around. And it has nothing to do with modern technology either. There's something in the psyche. There's something psychological happening, something sub and
Right.
unconscious happening.
But so
And
let me
that's
ask you
important to
this.
understand.
This is a 2025 question for you, Ryan. So it's a good 2025 question, especially for this audience. So when a person like Elon Musk comes out and says, listen, I've got satellites all over the sky. If I see an alien, if I see one, I'll be the first to let you know. If I see an alien craft at all, I'll be the first to let you know. Now, there's a polar story going on here. One, people believe what Elon Musk is saying and that it's a lot of hype. The other side of the polar spectrum is that, well, Elon Musk runs a bunch of satellites and stuff, so it's in his agenda for people to look to him for the information about the stuff, and that's why he's saying it. I think that's a victim mentality. The context, where's the real context here? In my opinion, it's either we have to trust the guy or we don't. He's right or he's not, or we just don't have enough information and we need to keep moving. But that statement that he just said, I was looking at it on the internet, millions of clicks, bro, all across the internet, and there is not one answer that's in context. It's all polar, man. What's your opinion on that?
And it's also fallacy, because that would assume that Elon Musk would, first of all, no matter how many satellites he has, would first of all be monitoring all of that, or having people monitor it for whatever it is you perceive aliens to be. Second of all, you would assume, that Elon Musk would then have the clearance via the government contracts he has to disclose that to the public. Like, there's a lot of assumptions going on there, and there's a lot of fallacy in those kinds of things. Kind of like the question of, well, if America's so bad, why do people want to come here? Well, being in the worst conditions here are probably better than the best conditions of some other countries. Other people come here for opportunity. Some of it's true and some of it's false. Some people come here for free handouts. Some people come here because they just like the culture and they don't come here permanently. Like, those questions are fallacies. Elon Musk, you're going to tell us about the aliens. Oh, yeah, I'd be the first one to tell you. What does that mean? That's about as useless and worthless and hollow as Hillary Clinton saying, I'll tell you about UFOs if you elect me president. It's just like a hollow statement, but it goes viral. People enjoy it, and I think it's all part of the game that we play.
Meanwhile, this guy's getting filthy rich putting satellites in the sky, and that's really all that matters. He's providing something we need: more internet, more screens, more information, faster. It's if you start thinking about it, it can get a little dark, right? But dude, I have a lot of Aquarian energy in me, man, and in the sense that I love technology, and maybe we'll do another show about that sometime. But I'm curious as to what your goals are for 2025 for the Secret Teachings. I mean, I see your show getting bigger, and I've been, I guess you could say, I've had the pleasure of witnessing it go from where people are trying to mess with you and keep you down to rising to new heights. And then you've realized that you're always going to be messed with and you're always going to have to stand your ground. Where do you go from here?
Fair question, a good question. I appreciate you asking me that, because I don't necessarily have like a plan. But in thinking about it in this brief moment as you're asking me, I've seen myself as coming into a whole new genre of radio where I'm willing to discuss the conspiratorial things. And of course, I guess what my show's quite famous for, the occult symbolism. But a lot of the things that I'm trying to do now are I'm trying to take narratives and I'm trying to break them apart and show how they're really coming from, like we talked about tonight, emotions and the polarities. And I'm trying to do that with everything: plane crashes, fog and snow not being real, or UFOs, or whatever the case might be. I'm trying to show people, which is actually the reason I got kicked off the last network. What I was saying on my show when I got kicked off the network was, I don't want to go to war with 2.2 billion Muslims I don't hate Arabs, and I might not be a Muslim, but I don't want to kill Muslims. And because I said that, people can't handle that when they're hardcore right Christian, Israeli, I guess pro-Israeli zealots.
Or they get those flags that say, "We stand with Israel." My grandfather has one of those. Yeah.
Oh God, those are so disgusting. So I think I'm trying to find balance within all of that, and ultimately, as I get to the end of each of my shows, I don't know if anybody's ever noticed this, but as I get to the end of each show, I try to crescendo by making the final point, which is that I think that we should try to figure out what we have more in common than different.
Amen.
So that we can realize, doesn't matter our skin color, doesn't matter what our eyes look like, or what our hair looks like, or what our toes look like. Like we're all just humans, and we all pretty much want the same thing: cup of coffee, cup of tea, go to the movie. We want have friends or whatever, and then that's pretty much it. Muslim, Christian, Jew, and that's what really I'm trying to push and advocate for my show. Just unfortunately, because I don't come at it from a religious point of view, it obviously comes off as some, atheistic left-winger or some zealot, right-winger or whatever, when I'm really not any of those things. Like I do have my own views, my own beliefs, Joe, but I try not to let them get too involved with my show. And I guess that also means that a lot of the times my show is contradictory because it's not really what I believe. It's me reporting on other things and trying to bring all sides and all voices of a situation, of an equation into the discussion. Because as much as I'll do a show on, Israel and how I can't stand Israel, and I think it's a Nazi state, and that doesn't mean I like Hamas because Israel created Hamas. But at the same time, I'll also do a show on Jewish mysticism and be in awe of that, and Babylonia and magic. And as much as I cannot stand the Chinese government, I've also done shows on the Jade Emperor, which is a fascinating story that is very similar. The Jade Emperor is very similar to the stories of Yahweh. So as much as I don't like China, I'll still do a show on that. And as much as I love Japan and their culture, I'll still do a show on the things about Japan I don't like. I hate the fact that everything in Tokyo is a damn QR code.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the secret teachings is still going to be the secret teachings. It's going to adapt, overcome, and continue to do what you do in the year 2025.
Yes, and perhaps it's not so much the show that's changing as it is my perspective on what the show has been the whole time.
Well, I have some things to think about for 2025 too. And, when it comes to what I'm going to do with the Fringe and stuff, you'll always be, regardless of wherever you are, a member of the Fringe FM family. You know that, man. And I'm proud to say that we are the one network that never threw you off the air, right? Like never. I don't believe in it, man. Even if people don't agree with that, not to say the Fringe FM is even what it used to be. Things grow, things change, things adapt. But the ideas that bring us together, regardless of wherever we are, is the same, man. And it's the golden rule, and it's speaking your truth, and it's treating people the way you want to be treated, and reporting as much real and honest information as you can, despite how people feel about it. And we got to keep pushing that, brother. That's what we got to keep pushing, pushing for, in my opinion.
Certainly. And, I think I couldn't tell you where he wrote it, but Joseph Campbell, and I apologize for not being able to have a source for this, but Joseph Campbell had said or written, because he was the famous mythologist, traveled all over the world and studied pretty much everything, put all this, mythology together and showed how all of our cultures and our traditions are more similar than they are dissimilar. And I think he was asked something about why, are you religious, or, can you pick a religion? And he said something to the effect of, and again, I'm butchering this, I'm super paraphrasing.
That's cool.
He said something to the effect of, he's like, I'm really, he's like, I'm kind of jealous of people that can pick a religion, because there's so much beauty in all of this. For someone who can just put 99% of it aside and say, okay, this is what I believe. He said there's a lot of power in that. And that's kind of how I've always seen things. And in fact, I honestly, I had never read Joseph Campbell until the last 2 years. And I think I I had already known a lot of what he wrote, and then when I read it, it's more his, not even necessarily the myths and the comparisons, but his perspective on things. And like when I read him, like Manly Hall, there's like a purity to it in a way. And he's a human too, and he made mistakes, but there's a purity to it in the sense that he's not preaching it to you. He's saying, this is what this tribe does. This is what this culture does. This is what this people does. And look at how similar these traditions are. This means that we're a lot more similar. He talks about the psychology of it. And to me, having that been my perspective for many, many years, and then I read Joseph Campbell and I thought, this is not just mythology. This is like what it means, which is, I guess, his premise about mythology anyway. It's what it means to be human. And that's really what, my goal is with my show and what I do. And if people listen to the full, length of an episode, ultimately that is what is hopefully conveyed at the end of each broadcast. That's my intention. That's my goal. That's what I hope to produce and display.
Well, you work really hard at it. I've been a witness to how you do your show. When I moved to New York, right, and we're two totally opposite guys. I like to hit a button and just talk. I go down to Ryan's office. It's all neat and tidy, and there's Post-it notes, and he's got his outline for the show. He's working hours ahead of time to make sure that what he's saying is correct, and really watching what you say and all this other stuff. Meanwhile, saying exactly what you feel and exactly what you mean. It was one of the most inspiring things I've ever seen, because out of the few years that I've done in radio, by the way, I learned everything myself off of the internet, which is why I love the internet. I got to witness a true professional for the first time, and it was inspiring, man, and I'm glad that you're still out there doing what you do. What are you, like in your 11th year now? Is it 12th year, 11th year of radio?
I've been doing radio for 15 years now.
15 years, okay.
The secret teachings for 11.
Yeah. So, still standing your ground, still doing your thing, and a really good friend and colleague, man. And I appreciate you coming on the broadcast. It's I wish you, I guess, the best new year for the secret teachings coming up. And as always, bro, if you need any help, if you need anything, I'm here, dude.
Oh, of course. And I want to thank you for the compliment, and without, I suppose, piggybacking on what you said, I should also add that based on your compliment, even though we're different in a lot of ways and work differently, we have learned a lot from each other. And I've also learned from you that it's okay to just let it go sometimes. And so sometimes I do sit down and do a show without any of that, paper and, pencils and pens and books. And I just go from the heart. And that sometimes comes out just as good as a show where which I don't really do a lot of hardcore paper preparation anymore. But
Good.
In general, like I've learned to do what you do. A lot of that comes from learning enough that I don't necessarily need a textbook or training wheels anymore. But but in essence, I've learned a little bit more of like, just sit down and whatever. Because I used to get on you. It's like, your show goes on at X time, and it's like 5 minutes before, and I'm like, Joe, what are you talking about? You're like, I have no idea.
Yeah, that's what I tell Ryan, but I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm just going to hit the button and go. And Ryan would be like, man, you could see the stress in his face when I would say this to him, right?
I'm stressed now.
He would literally go, I have no idea how you're doing that, And it's just like, I don't know. I just love radio, man. I love to talk about these kinds of things. And it's, I don't know, dude. It's the one passion that hasn't, how we have passions in our life as men, ladies. I mean, I don't know if this is a dude thing, but for me, it's like I will drive a passion into the ground until there is nothing left, nothing but dust. And then I'll sit around and wait for another passion to come into my life. And it kind of sucks because everybody's like, what are you doing? And usually relationships crumble when you do that kind of stuff. But that's a man cycle, so to speak. But with radio, with this, it's never faded. It's never faded away. Never. And I think we have that in common,
Me either. And despite the fact that we tend to have a difference in those ways that we do radio, the thing that we do, again, to get back to the idea of finding what we have in common in general, but for you and I in particular, when I prepare a show, a lot of the times I do it like you do it, in the sense that I just sit down and start talking. But that comes after hours of thinking about what I'm going to discuss and allowing, and I've done this for years, allowing things to come to me. And when you do that, you just open yourself up to that, not to some spirit, but to listening to that voice inside of you, intuition, if you want to call it that. It's similar to just sitting down and talking. I'm just opening myself to that before, hours before the show starts. But we both have that in common. I think any good artist is probably doing the same exact type of thing. So yeah, I respect you. You're a good friend of mine, and more than friends. Like we've known each other for a long time, not just like radio acquaintances. But you're a good friend, and I appreciate you having me on the show. And it's a fun conversation. I hope that it was well-rounded for the listeners.
Yeah, man. 2025 I think is going to be good for you. Hopefully it'll be good for us both, but I know it's going to be good for you. And I appreciate you coming on, man. We'll do it again for sure.
You got it, Joe. I appreciate it. Thank you. And hello to everybody in the chat room. I'm not sure how many people are there. I can't see it, but I'm sure I know some of you. I know Mitch. So shout out.
Oh yeah.
Mitch.
Night Stalker showed up. Some of the old school people showed up. Night Stalker showed up in here. Joseph Carrero's been around for a while. You know what I want to, for the people that have supported this show for years, you know how we always say, Ryan, like, hey, you can just support like $5, whatever. That helps so much more than you think, consistent support. Like Joseph Carrera has consistently supported this show behind the scenes without saying anything, without wanting anything like that for years. And he showed up to say, hey, what's up? So people are still out there. We're all still fighting a good fight, man. I'm
glad to hear that.
You guys check out Ryan's show at thesecretteachings.info. Download the podcast. I believe you can get it on any podcast player. I'm sure you have a membership section too. I think it's all explained on the website, but you can also email Ryan at rdgable@yahoo.com. Is that still your email?
That's correct. Yep, rdgable@yahoo.com. And the website you gave is accurate, but I also got a shorthand version of that at tstradio.info.
There you go.
Very simple website. All the links are there for the free archive, and if you want to subscribe, there's more than just the archive. You get more than just that, but it's all very explainable on the website. Very simple.
Yeah, and one of these days we'll get we'll get the rap group White Noise back together. We'll do another rap for y'all, huh?
You remember that?
You remember that? White Noise. I think I found that audio, but I'll send it to you when I find it. But thanks, guys. What?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you hear? I had made a recent one. Did you hear the one I did recently?
No, I need to hear it though. Yeah.
I'll have to send it to you.
Yeah, send it to me, man. Send it to me.
Joe.
And thanks for the super chat again. I have to click on it. Robo 1776 for the 25. That support helps us. Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys. We'll be back tomorrow night. Same time, same channel. Good night, y'all. Sweet dreams.